Nothing can elevate an already great superhero flick quite like a banging soundtrack. And, as is the case with a few of the entries on this top 10 list, the perfect needle drop can make even the most mediocre comic book movie more palatable. Music is as important to the overall feel and aesthetic of the cinematic superhero experience as the costumes, the special effects, the writing, dialogue, you name it. Which is why I enlisted the help of my good friend, fellow music nerd, and one of my favourite YouTubers, Matty from the game show, to talk about only the most quality superhero albums, as well as some often overlooked deep cuts. Now, it's worth pointing out at this point that we're talking specifically about soundtrack albums here, as opposed to orchestral scores. So you won't find John Williams' Superman, Danny Elfman's Batman, or Alan Silvestri's Avengers themes on this list, as legendary as they are. Also, if you want to listen along at home, I've put together a Spotify playlist featuring all of the albums on this list, which you can find linked in the description below. But enough preamble from me. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels. I'm absolutely full of a cold if you couldn't tell from my voice, and these are the top 10 superhero movie soundtrack albums. Number 10. Okay, Matty, so first of all, we've got Avengers Assemble, music from and inspired by the motion picture. And I'm excited that this is number 10 on our list because it represents to me the last bastion of comic book movie soundtracks, with a lot of this like contemporary commercial alternative rock. I know that's an oxymoron, but it's like radio alternative.
Yes, I love it. It's indicative that cinema is now moving away from having contemporary music, because from this point on, it was all down to scores. This was the last line of great film soundtracks.
And I think that's a real shame.
The album is wall-to-wall bangers. All of the tracks are absolutely great. And the best thing is not one of these songs is in the film. Born to Rise is at the end credits, but that's the closest you get to any of the songs being in the actual film. It's a shame, like you said, had these songs been in the film, I think it would have been even better. Avengers is a really great film, but putting some music from the time would have really helped. I like it when you can tell what time a film was made in. A lot of people say it's negative and it dates a film, but I really like watching a film and hearing the music and being reminded of all the context and the kind of feelings I had at the time and the people maybe I knew or the friends I saw the film with.
I think this is something that's going to come up a lot when we talk about these albums, is that they all act as time capsules of that period of time. You know, there are films and albums that we are definitely going to talk about where I'm like, if that had come out a year either side, the soundtrack would be radically different.
Yeah.
And to some extent, you know, this is similar. Although we should talk about specifically some of the songs. So, you know, like you say, you've got Soundgarden with Live to Rise, which was the kind of like the big single that came out of this soundtrack. Scott Weiland of Stone Temple Pilots fame, he's a mainstay of a lot of these superhero soundtracks. And Evanescence, of course, are on there.
100%. I was just about to say, speaking of mainstays, we have to mention the fact that Evanescence are on this album because they come up a lot.
This period of time of like having an album that's marketed alongside a movie, it creates a timestamp of when the movies came out and the kind of vibe around that movie and all of this stuff that I think is really important to these films. And that's certainly true with this. You know, this is 2012 in a nutshell for me. Number 9.
So we're circling back to the point you made where you'd said if an album was made 1 year earlier or 1 year later, it would have been radically different. And I don't think that could be any more true than Flash Gordon by Queen. There is something so magical about having a band do an entire soundtrack for a film. It doesn't happen very often, and when it does, it is just such a vibe. And Flash Gordon is amazing. Flash Gordon rules. It's such an 80s film, and so there's no one better. If you needed a rock opera soundtrack to do it, there's nobody you could rely on any more than Queen. And that's it. Like, I don't really know what more can be said, but it is just the perfect encapsulation of a filmmaker and a musician just being in the same mind space at the same time. Everybody knows the Flash Gordon theme. Like, that's the opening track. It comes in hard. That's the one everyone knows. But then what you get after that is just a full solid hour of 80s rock opera. It's amazing. I just love it.
Number 8.
from one that you brought to the table to another, and again, I'm glad you brought this. This wouldn't have occurred to me to suggest this, and it's not one I've listened to much before you did, but I'm a big fan of the film. So this is Blade, music from and inspired by the motion picture, at number 8 on our list. Do you want to tell us about it?
Absolutely. I was just imagining in the edit, this is where you cut into like some shots of Blade, some like hip hop, the cars driving down the street. This soundtrack is so exceptionally good because of everything that the film is about. The late 90s was a really kind of aggressive, macho place in cinema, and these films are all about white people getting into white people business, and then the soundtracks to these films is guitar music. It's punk rock, metal, and alternative. It's a very white scene, and I think there would have been some temptation when doing a superhero film to do the same thing with Blade, but somebody somewhere made a very, very conscious decision, because Blade is a person of color, and actually Blade the film is a very black centric film. The principal cast are all people of color, and the soundtrack reflects it. And I think that is so exceptionally good, not just for all the politics around it, but the soundtrack is actually also awesome.
A few years after this, so say like, 2003, I'm thinking of Triple X with Vin Diesel.
Yeah.
And that's when these kind of like macho action films were starting to bring in that kind of like hip hop and rap soundtracks. And at that point, it was very commercialized and radio friendly in a way. And I think you're absolutely right that it's still countercultural and it's still authentic is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a Marvel film, and actually it comes up a lot in my videos because it's important to the context of the superhero movie boom that we're living in at the moment, and that's been going on for the last 20 years, is that I will talk about how X-Men and Spider-Man kicked off, the kind of the Marvel period of films. And people will always try and gotcha me in the comments and say, oh, you forgot about Blade. But really, Blade stands apart from that, because I don't think Blade had that much of an impact on the superhero thing, because it was so unique and so authentic in its kind of grindhouse and horror sensibilities. And the music goes along with that. The music isn't commercial, or super commercial anyway, and it is, it's kind of hardcore rap. So
yeah, I think that's exactly the vibe.
Number 7.
At number 7, we have The Crow, the original motion picture soundtrack. Of all the albums on this list, this is the one that kind of aligns most with my music taste, I would say. This came out in 1994, and I would say that is the year that this kind of goth and post-grunge aesthetic really hit critical mass in mainstream culture. And I'll run through some of this. Is like an all-star cast of the kind of the alternative rock bands at the time. You've got The Cure's on there. You've got Stone Temple Pilots again, so they're a kind of mainstay. Nine Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine, Helmet, Pantera, Jesus and Mary Chain. This is going to be a recurring theme again, but it's just about the aesthetic and the kind of The Crow more than any other film is like the film of 1994. It's just like the most moody goth vibe of any film I've ever seen, and this soundtrack goes along with it perfectly. And 90s comic spooky boy, that's my whole aesthetic. So I had to mention The Crow.
Yes.
I've never covered The Crow on the channel, but he's essentially should be the mascot of the channel, really.
But maybe that's 2021 goals.
Yeah, okay.
We need a hashtag. We need to do a hashtag like Crowvember.
Crowvember. Yes. Listen, I know you're enjoying the video, and, who could blame you? But I just want to take a minute to tell you about our superlative sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creative and curious people like you. Explore new skills, deepen existing passions, and most importantly, get inspired. There are literally thousands of classes on there, from illustration, graphic design, animation, video editing, photography, music, and so much more. Recently, I've been getting really into toy and action figure photography because I'm a massive dweeb apparently. But the truth is, I'm a very amateur photographer. So I just went straight to Skillshare and I brushed up on the fundamentals of DSLR photography with Justin Bridges. This crash course gives you everything you need to know about all that confusing stuff like shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, so that you can take the stunning professional photos you've always dreamed of.
What I really love about Skillshare is the combination of video lessons, which are great for visual learners like me, plus the class projects that encourage you to get creative and put your new skills into practice. Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there are no ads and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. Sounds good, right? Well, the good news is the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description below this video will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So whether you're a beginner, a pro, a dabbler, or a master, Skillshare has the tools you need to explore your creativity. Thanks, on with the show.
Number 6.
Number 6, it's Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, soundtrack from and inspired by the motion picture. I'm going to be showing my ignorance here by saying that I'm not too caught up on the current rap scene, but similar to the Blade one, although it's in a more kind of poppy and family-friendly way because you've got stuff like Jaden Smith on there and things like that. But I feel like this does the rap soundtrack in an authentically black way. And, that's not really for me to say, but I'm going to go on a limb and say it. And is respectable rap music. It isn't the kind of the white version of rap music that was in, I don't know why I'm picking on Triple X and stuff like that, but it was in a lot of those 2000s white bro movies that had this kind of like really watered down rap music.
Triple X deserves it. It's fine.
Yeah, I think this was so essential that they got this soundtrack right to Miles and to Miles's story and his heritage and everything like that. And you've got to give it to them. The people who put this film together, clearly there is a lot of care about the character and about telling this story, and the music is a big part of that for me.
I'm on the same level because I'm thousands of years old, so I don't know any of these artists. But one of the great things about any soundtrack, and it's true of all the soundtracks on this list, is a great soundtrack can just pull you in with one good hook, and then it's a gateway drug to introducing you to a bunch of new music that you'd never heard before. And that's what Spiderverse did for me. The tracks on the soundtrack of note for me, I think Sunflower is the one that most people know. What's Up Danger, absolute banger. We all know that one. And Jaden, I can't even believe how good he is in this. I didn't think he was going to be very good, but he's great. For me, this is left field, but I think actually your target audience for your channel, being comic book people, being relatively young people, this is the soundtrack that people have probably most likely to have heard of.
Yeah, and that's something I don't often think about in terms of the people who watch the videos on my channel, is that they don't have the same experiences as me. They're not nostalgic for the same things that I am necessarily. For a lot of kids, this is the sound of Spider-Man, in the way that for me it was the 90s cartoon and the Neversoft game soundtrack. That's what Spider-Man sounds like to me. This is what Spider-Man will sound like to a lot of younger people, and I think that's really good. This is a really good representation of that.
Number 5.
And from one album which defines the sound of Spider-Man to one generation, to another album which defines the sound of Spider-Man to a previous generation. Our number 5 on this list is music from and inspired by Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. I'm just going to go out there and say this is the original and probably the best 2000s film soundtrack. This is an all-timer for me. So when we talk about the sound of an era, everybody I knew liked at least one song on this album, no matter which kind of clique you were from. There was something here for everyone. It's not like super heavy metal, but there's like college rock all throughout it. Standout tracks are Hero by Chad Kroeger and Bother by Stone Sour, both of which I'm pretty sure were exclusive for this album, as well as Aerosmith covering the Spider-Man theme tune. So it has that PS1 game vibe for me.
I feel like we need to talk a little bit more about Hero,
yes,
by Chad Kroeger, because you're saying that this blew the doors off that whole comic book film soundtrack thing, and nothing typifies it more to me than Hero. From the music video, which you would see a lot, that was on constant rotation on the kind of the rock channels that I was watching in 2002, and it's so tied to the film for me, that song. The two are inseparable in my mind, and I think that's the mark of a really great soundtrack.
100% this. I can't... Every time Sam Raimi's Spider-Man comes up in conversation, if I ever see a poster for it, I just burst into, and they say that hero... I just can't stop myself. jumping into Chad Kroeger mode.
Love or hate Nickelback, this song is perfect for this setting because it is kind of like squeaky clean and friendly and radio rock, but it really soars in the way that I think comic book movies have to be. You know, comic book movies are stupid and sanitized and goofy. But if you let yourself over to them and you suspend your disbelief, they can fill you with joy in a way that nothing else can. And that's the same with this song.
Yes. What I love most is this video is going to end up just being a big Chad Kroeger apologist video, and I have all the time in the world for this.
Why you're wrong about Chad Kroeger.
Yeah, he's the Kurt Cobain of music.
Number 4. Sorry.
Okay, moving swiftly on. At number 4, we have Guardians of the Galaxy Awesome Mix Volume 1. And there is no other film on this list where the soundtrack plays such an integral part to the narrative. This is, woven in diegetically into the film. And obviously Peter Quill gets his mixtape, which his mother made for him with AM radio music from the 70s. And this was the soundtrack of my summer 2014. Saw the film. The film was an absolute revelation for me. I walked out and I was like, that is the Star Wars of my generation. Even though Star Wars films have come out during my generation, Guardians of the Galaxy is the Star Wars of my generation. And I did not walk to the nearest music store, bought Awesome Mix Volume 1, and it didn't leave my car stereo all that summer. I just listened to it constantly.
I feel exactly the same way about this. Exactly the same way. The fact that music is such a core theme, and the shared love of music between Peter and his mum, and how a great song can bring people together, and that a soundtrack to a moment becomes more important than the moment itself. All these kind of vibes that we're talking about around soundtracks, it becomes very meta around Guardians of the Galaxy, because it's all typified here about why we find music so important. It becomes an important part of the film. And then also the soundtrack is an absolute wall-to-wall, more bangers than a butcher's window soundtrack. It is incredible. Exceptional film, exceptional soundtrack. I did the same thing. I went and bought the soundtrack the same day, and I played it so many times in my car. I had to buy the CD again. I'm almost certain that I wore the CD out. I listened to it that much. I can't say enough good things about this soundtrack.
Number 3.
I'm not quite sure why Josh allowed me to get it so high on this list, but number 3 on our list is Daredevil the album. And I've just got to say, this is an incredibly personal choice for me. What might be called now Marvel Phase 0. Before there was a plan, before there was a Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was no kind of cohesive textual connection between any of these films. And someone somewhere decided that Daredevil, being that it was a film from 2003, that they were just going to absolutely lean into peak early 2000s nu metal and go for this full-on counterculture thing. And we were seeing a lot of this in the early 2000s anyway. Like Josh has said, this is the era of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Neversoft's Spider-Man, so this was part of it. But Daredevil just feels almost like an inauthentic tag-along for the ride, rather than being this really kind of settled, urban, gritty film. But I just can't not love it. Nothing more typifies 2003 than The Man Without Fear by Drowning Pool featuring Rob Zombie, which is a song written about being Daredevil and has an incredible fist in the air chorus chanting Daredevil, Daredevil. It's just incredible. And I think most importantly is we have to mention it has both Bring Me to Life and My Immortal by Evanescence. So Evanescence are on this one twice.
And, as we were saying with Hero on Spider-Man, Bring Me to Life was just on constantly. And that song has become a meme at this point. It's so kind of ubiquitous. And it's all wrapped up in the overall aesthetic of Daredevil to me. So I think that's really important. And it's an interesting contrast between this, I would say, and music from Spider-Man. Peter Parker is a college-age kid, and so the music that's on that soundtrack reflects what you would imagine he would be listening to. It would make sense for Peter Parker to be into those bands, to be into the Strokes, to be into the Hives. I don't know if I can imagine Matt Murdock listening to Hoobastank, for example.
I already started laughing when you started making this point because I jumped to the end and went, this is such a good point. Why would a blind man listen to such aggressively loud music? Like, hearing is the one thing he has.
Well, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it drowns out the extraneous sounds. Maybe this is how Matt Murdock unwinds. Okay, you've turned me around on it. This is 100%. Yeah. Matt Murdock is a massive nu metal guy.
Number 2.
At number 2 is Spawn, the album. How could it not be? I think some people will bristle at the idea of this being at number 2. But for those in the cult of Spawn, which I know there are many in the Church of Spawn with us, this album, basically in a kind of like act of genius of taking the temperature of the time of 1997, the producers of this film, they said, let's take a load of metal artists and alt-rock artists, and then let's take a load of dance and techno and drum and bass artists, and let's get them to collaborate in ways that they probably would never have come together if not for the Spawn movie. And what it creates is a really unique coming together of styles and genres that really suits Spawn and the world of Spawn, which the appeal of Spawn is not really in the storytelling or, you know, anything like that. It's
the chains.
It's the chains. It's the chains and the capes and the necroplasm and all of these cool things. Many people say this about Todd McFarlane, is that the reason he was so successful is because he knew what made an 11-year-old tick. He could cut through the bullshit and get to what would excite a child. And this kind of soundtrack does that as well. Even though the film is not good, I think they actually did nail the aesthetic of Spawn. And it's kind of fitting that Spawn is a comic with not the best storytelling, but a really strong aesthetic, and the film is similar. And the music goes along with that.
Everything you said is correct. Spawn is the most 90s comic book character ever. He's so edgy, he doesn't have a middle, right? He's just it's like he removed any sense of storytelling in order just to push the aesthetic to its absolute limits. And I think you already made this point, but that's exactly where this soundtrack fits as well. And I think what's really great is the way that you've got traditional rock music being moved into the 21st century with all this new electronica is also kind of indicative of the comic, because I'm pretty sure Spawn was experimenting with like digital CGI in the pages and so on. So it's really just collaborating between lots of new emerging forms of expression and just seeing how mad it can get. And if you've never heard this soundtrack, it's really something. You might not like it, but there's nothing else like it. There's no other example of something like this out there.
Number 1.
Batman Forever is the album that most people associate with Batman. If you talk about Batman, people talk about Kiss My Rose by Seal. They talk about Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me by U2. These are songs that didn't just define a generation, but generations later, people still associate with Batman.
Yeah, this is a very diverse album, really, because you have like kind of your radio pop with, I guess, Seal and U2. And that, by the way, is the best U2 song. I'm not a big U2 fan, but I can listen to Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, Kill Me on repeat.
Undisputed.
But then you have genuinely respectable alternative singer-songwriter type stuff like PJ Harvey. You know, you have stuff that kind of anticipated the way that the trends of music with The Offspring.
Yeah.
It's very of its time, but it's very like a muso soundtrack, I would say.
Oh yeah, it's got Flaming Lips on it. There's nothing more muso than Flaming Lips.
And this is just a banger. You know, you can chuck this on at a party, depending on what parties you go to. You go to parties with 30-year-olds like we do, but it's
I can tell you that I have been to parties with 30-year-olds where this soundtrack is put on, and no one is having a bad time when that happens.
For sure. I think Batman Forever, certainly, and both the Schumacher Batman films are having a bit of a resurgence with people our age and slightly younger who are reevaluating them, maybe through rose-coloured glasses, but certainly saying, you know, we realise now what Joel Schumacher was trying to do with those films. And I think the soundtrack kind of stands as a testament to that and should really come up in that conversation more. It would have been a lot easier to be cynical with the soundtrack like this But, you know, from where I'm standing, there is some respectability to this album.
Absolutely. And one thing that we didn't mention throughout anywhere else on this list is a lot of these albums came out in the era where music videos were still quite important.
Yeah, and we did talk about it briefly with Hero by Chad Kroeger and the music video for that, and then the music video for Evanescence in Daredevil. But it's easy to forget, and maybe like younger people watching this won't get this, but I hate to sound like a boomer by saying that, but it's true. Now, when you're excited about a film, you can watch the trailer on YouTube, you can watch clips on YouTube, and in less than 6 months from, I don't even know what it is now, it's a really quick turnaround from when a film is released to when it's available on home media or streaming. But back in the day, that could be a year or more between when it came out at the cinema and when it, you know, you were able to get it on videotape. And so in that interim, the only way you could be immersed in that world would be to read novelizations or, you know, comic book adaptations, to play with toys, to play video games. But mostly it was to see the music videos which had clips of those films, or in the case of like Seal, Kiss from a Rose, it's Seal squirming around next to the bat signal on a Gotham City rooftop. And, you know, even though it's tangential to the film, it's a peek into that world, and it was the only way as a fan to experience that world until you could get hold of a copy for yourself. And so that's why these are so important to me, at least as kind of superhero movie ephemera. Is, you know, I'm trailing off here, but I think you get my point.
I loved where you were going with that.
It was almost profound, and then it just fizzled out.
No, it was profound.
I peaked with the word ephemera is what it was.
Yeah.
My brain just gave up.
Thank you for watching this video, and a special thanks to Matty for helping me put this list together. He's made some of my absolute favourite videos on YouTube, so I definitely recommend checking his channel out by clicking the link on screen now or down in the description. Seriously, go click on it now, you won't regret it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that jazz. There's also the Spotify playlist in the description if you want to bop along to spawn the album on your next commute. If you are commuting still, I don't know. But until next time we meet heroes, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.